Hello everyone, my name is Anna Nemzer and this is my program Total Recall. I'm a journalist at TV Rain and a co-founder of the Russian Independent Media Archive, both of which made this program happen. Dear friends, this short video will precede 4 episodes of my program Total Recall. I'm recording it because usually my colleagues and I film my programs like in batches, several at a time. And in early February, we produced 4 programs, and all of it was before February 16th, before the day when news came of the murder of Alexei Navalny. And I insist on using this exact wording, murder, because we don't know exactly what happened on February 16th at the high-risk colony at Harp, and was it even 16th or maybe even earlier. But I do know for sure that on August 20th, 2020, Alexei Navalny was poisoned, and this was an attempt to kill him, an attempt made by Russian authorities, and the goal wasn't achieved then. And they continued trying to kill him for the next 3.5 years, and they succeeded. We filmed like 4 programs about how Putin preserved the KGB under a different name, about the Yugos case, the first loud case of political repression, and about 2 horrible tragedies, Nordost and Beslan. I discussed it all from the perspective of the dictator's playbook that Putin has been following since year 2000. And I talked about it without knowing what would happen in a few days, but I definitely knew that a dictator driven into a corner and enraged would stop at nothing. The question then became only whose side time would be on. So I don't know how to live and work, and it didn't just happen now. I didn't know it since February 2022, but I know Alexei Navalny asked us to continue working. I know Yulia Navalny is saying the same thing right now. I know Russian human rights activists continue to work, and it's an honor for me to be acquainted with them. Russian political prisoners are also calling us not to despair, and if this is the case, then without any hope, I will continue to work to release this program, to preserve the archives of independent media that Russian authorities are destroying, collect other archives, evidence and proof of crimes committed by Russian authorities over the past 24 years. December 20th is known in Russia as Chekist Day, celebrating the operatives of the various security bureaus. A Chekist is a predecessor of a KGB agent. As you will see, KGB is not so much an ominous abbreviation as it is only one of the many names of organized governmental violence against his own population. Here is a quote from the most well-known KGB agent.
A special group of FSB operatives dispatched by you to infiltrate the government and work undercover has been successful in phase 1 of the operation.
Yes, to another letters, KGB, FSB. The clip you just saw is from 1999, when a former KGB operative and soon-to-be president of Russia is congratulating his colleagues on Chekist Day with his famous little jokes. A Chekist was an operative of the early Soviet security bureau called the All-Russian Emergency Commission, abbreviated in Russian as VCK or CK. On December 20th, 1917, this organization was founded to combat counter-revolutionary activity and various forms of sabotage. This date was celebrating among Soviet security bureaus for many years. After the defeat of the Soviet Union, even the idea of celebrating somehow KGB was out of question, but it was Boris Yeltsin, the first president of post-Soviet Russia, who in 1995 made it into an official day of celebrating operatives of secret police organizations. So that it wouldn't bear the Cheka connotation, Yeltsin called it the Operative of State Security Organizations Day. Doesn't roll off the tongue as easy, does it? Cheka was a punitive agency which was remarkably just a Soviet repackaging of the Tsarist secret police, even more violent. Its specialty was the very concept of violent repression and mass murder under the banner of state security. As I said, the name itself was changed many times from VCK to GPU to OGPU to NKVD to MGB and finally to KGB. These seemingly inanimate letters are responsible for deaths of millions of the very people that they were supposedly established to protect. During the 1991 coup, one of the most important symbols of the defeat of the Soviet system was the demolition of the massive monument to Felix Dzerzhinsky in front of the KGB headquarters in downtown Moscow. Dzerzhinsky was the father of Cheka as a whole, from ideology to execution. In this footage, the people, absolutely ecstatic about their victory, are preparing to storm the KGB headquarters. The storm was called off by none other than Boris Yeltsin.
Vadim Viktorovich Bakatin has been appointed the new head of the KGB. As a clear-headed leader, he will begin his new job. That is all. Thank you. All the best to you. I ask that all of you disperse right now in front of my eyes. I am asking you to disperse.
The idea was to break the KGB down into multiple agencies that would compete with each other and by virtue of doing so, keep each other under control. I'm not going to list all the proposed subdivisions and abbreviations that ensued, but I have to admit, Bakatin was not successful.
Я могу также абсолютно свидетельствовать.
Also, for your audience, I can attest to the fact that in the fall of 1991, there was potential to destroy the KGB, terminate this horrifying structure and malignant tumor on the body of our country. There was potential for that to happen.
Это можно было сделать.
This interview took place in 1994, and the speaker is Evgenia Albats, a journalist who studied security bureaus in depth. Today she teaches at NYU.
Комитет государственной безопасности на протяжении...
All through the 70 years of Soviet rule, the KGB was maintained as a family, as a strict corporate structure.
Это корпоративная структура.
This was a corporate structure with a corporate mentality in which all the main committees are tightly wound together.
It appears that this KGB bind was the very thing that the 90s reformers underestimated when trying to destroy it.
Сейчас мы имеем с вами дело.
Today we are dealing with an organization with several 100,000 people in its employ. By the way, in Moscow alone there are 88,000 Chekists. We're talking about several 100,000 people, all fighting for their income.
For a number of reasons, lustration, or barring individuals from performing their jobs if these jobs included committing crimes under the protection of a criminal regime, was a scary concept at the time. There was fear that it would be used as a means of revenge rather than reform. Galina Vasilyevna Starovoytova, about whom I was lucky to make a full-length film a few years back, was an advisor to the president at the time and dealt with the question of lustration extensively.
This is a very important and sensitive document, and I dismiss any and all potential accusations of that we reject dissent, of that we are proposing starting a witch hunt.
The majority of starry-eyed intellectuals, myself included, at the time were wary of it becoming a witch hunt. There was a bit of truth to it, though. There really was a danger of that happening. However, having averted that hazard, we invited a different one.
So what other restrictions we are proposing? By restriction on performing formal duties for a number of persons, must be understood in temporary ban only for this transition period, while the retaliation of a totalitarian regime is still all too possible, and while there are no establishments in our society that could protect us from this retaliation. The only guarantee today is the will of the enlightened part of our society, which is not very numerous. A restriction on holding regional executive office beginning with head of the administration of districts, cities and regions, and ending with ministers of entire republics and the Russian Federation at large.
There were few except her who understood that illustration is not a witch hunt or forming of execution lists. It was supposed to be a ban on performing certain jobs, which, yes, would have prevented a certain former KGB officer from progressing the political hierarchy all the way to president of Russia. But that wasn't even the main point. Illustration was meant to become part of the process of reflection of our society. All societies are made this way. They have to think about their past and the roles that each individual within the society played in that past. It was this crucial element of building a new society for Russia didn't undertake on the official level. There were very few people who, like Starovoytova, were willing to commit to this exhausting intellectual work of crafting true reforms. So she did it by herself. Here is what she said about the dissolution of the KGB.
In my opinion, such a powerful structure, which should rightfully be called a government within a government, cannot be reformed with such a decree because it is impossible to conceptualize the structure of the reform or the political orientation. That is, in what direction should the very concept of national security be developing? There is nothing in it describing the process of personnel selection, or what is the employment future of those that must be fired, what will be the fate of the archives. So what does it entail then? That Lubyanka is to be under strict lockdown, the archives are to be sealed off, and the employees are just sitting at home and receiving salaries until their future is determined?
These were the precise questions that Vadim Bakatin didn't have the stamina to answer. That of Yevgeny Sevastyanov, head of Moscow KGB 1991-1992, and Sergei Stepashin, head of the Committee for Investigating the Crimes of the KGB in 1991, later first head of the FSB, was also not sufficient. Supposed Democrats who supposedly also set out to reform the KGB.
A highly respected historian and journalist, Leonid Mlechin. You probably know him.
Of course I know him. Even read some of his work.
He writes that, in reality, you and Bakatin saved Lubyanka.
He means that the question was raised about the destruction of the KGB as a whole, as a societal class. After all, why would the KGB be hit the hardest? Because first it was the KGB under the Council of Ministers, so it was under the Council of Ministers. And then, when it became the vanguard of the party, the vanguard could have also been made history along with the party. I actually firmly oppose the politicization of national security agencies. They must operate completely outside of politics.
The intention alone is not enough. So the KGB was allowed to remain and continued operating in a near syncopal state, frantically changing abbreviation after abbreviation, as if hoping that there was a combination of letters that would somehow erase the past. This was an incredible moment when the historians from the Memorial Human Rights Organization visit the archives, and the KGB agents, in attempts to do a 180, are readily giving out interviews describing the work of their bureau. General Oleg Kalugin was the highlight, as he personally wrote books, or rather incriminating exposes. He was invited to speak on the subject matter in the media and served as a witness in court cases against exposed and arrested KGB agents. Yet the agency remained fully operational. There is something called institutional inertia, which is of the essence here.
Any closed system with undisclosed aims and expenses that does not answer to the parliament or society poses a threat to everybody. How can this very real closed system with incredible capabilities and a massive number of various types of informants who have not ceased performing their duties to unknown ends not be dangerous? Of course it's dangerous. They are gathering all this information which can be used in any way imaginable.
In 1995, they settled on FSB as their choice of abbreviation. It stands for Federal Security Service. Their new coat of arms is the same sword and shield as that on the Soviet incarnation symbol, but with a double-headed eagle instead of the red star and hammer and sickle. The renunciation of the Soviet security symbology and return to the unknown but no doubt historically accurate roots. Nikolai Patrushev, former director of the FSB and Putin's closest ally, described it in the following way. The roots of our national security agencies run deep throughout history, all the way to the very founding of a centralized Russian government. Him and Putin both have unhealthy obsession with history, usually fake history, but back to the topic at hand. This is when Yeltsin expanded the jurisdiction of FSB employees. The bureau has been tasked with combating the actions of individuals and public organizations which aim to violently overthrow the constitutional order of the Russian Federation. And right then and there, December 20th is instated as an official celebration of the employees of national security agencies. Simply put, Chekist Day, which it later became known as.
After celebrating the holiday Chekist Day, I see not everyone is present. Some are still out celebrating.
And 2 years later, Yeltsin said this in his address congratulating the National Security Bureau employees. He didn't forget to call December 20th Chekist Day either.
Looking back, I realized that we came dangerously close to overdoing it when exposing the crimes of the state security bureaus. For in their history, there had not only been dark pages, but moments they could truly be proud of.
And another year later, look who it is.
Officers, good afternoon, dear colleagues. I must fulfill the President's request and introduce you to the new director of the FSB, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Boris Nikolaevich signed the order this past Saturday.
Yet another year later, Putin returned his former KGB boss Yuri Andropov plaque to the wall of the FSB headquarters. After Putin was promoted to prime minister, his successor, Nikolai Patrushev, said this in an interview with the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper.
Whenever I give out governmental awards to our boys, I look deeply into their faces. Highbrow intellectuals, analysts, broad-shouldered, weathered special ops fighters, quiet bomb technicians, strict investigators, reserved operatives of counterintelligence. On the outside, they look different, but there is one vital quality that unites them. They are people of service, and if you will, the neo-nobility.
And at that moment, the magazine Kommersant Government ordered 2 polls of public opinion from the agency's Russian Public Opinion Research Center and Romir, asking the following question: which movie character are you most likely to vote for the upcoming presidential election? The Russian Public Opinion Research Center's poll returned with the following top 3. Peter the Great, Gleb Zhiglov, most famous investigator on Soviet screen, and Marshal Zhukov, the commander-in-chief of the Soviet army during World War II. But there was a 4th place, Stirlitz. The Romir poll came back with this as top 3, Zhukov, Stirlitz, and Zhiglov. Who's Stirlitz, you might ask? He's the main character of the most successful Soviet TV series 17 Moments of Spring. Stirlitz, whose real name was Isaev, was an ex-KGB spy. You probably already guessed what organization is hiding behind this abbreviation, serving undercover as a Standartenführer on the SS. These polls, which were multiple choice, aimed to show that a KGB agent is just the kind of president that the Russian people would like to see in preparation for Putin's lateral move. And starting from the year 2000, there has been an annual commemorative concert dedicated to Chekist Day.
С праздником! С Днем работника органов безопасности!
The set list is the most perfect showcase of just how apparent and strong the legacy of NKVD, KGB and Tsarist secret police, and even the army lives on with the current incarnation of the bureau. Songs about officers and revolutionary sailors singing the folk song that was popular among both the communists and Tsarists during the Civil War, and songs about operatives, etc. It is a pretty difficult task to be both the noble officers and the commissars in dusty helmets at the same time, because it was those very commissars who hunted and murdered the noble officers. So there are some notes of cannibalism in this. And in 2007, a self-congratulatory campaign to rehabilitate the image of Dzerzhinsky, the father of Cheka, was initiated. Researcher Julie Feder called this phenomenon high Chekism. The Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War prepared an exhibition dedicated to the anniversary of Dzerzhinsky's birthday. The museum director had this to say.
The structures of VCK always demonstrated purity of heart, and it is comforting to see the FSB inheriting these values and becoming a true successor of that fine organization.
Dzerzhinsky diaries were published, including a collection of love letters under the proud title, I Love You. The media was chock full of articles discussing the potential return of the Dzerzhinsky monument to Lubyanka. In the end, they did put up a monument, but in a different place and a smaller one, because the other one was too monumental. A detailed history of the FSB and attempts to dissolve it is a topic for an entire book or feature film, but the aim of this video is to see the institutional inertia which carried and still carries the machine, which has an uncertain relationship with the government. If the Tsarist secret police served the monarchy and the NKVD served Stalin, the later abbreviations were less obvious in their alliances. It became increasingly harder to say with certainty if the agency served the Soviet and later Russian government or used it as a cover to exercise their own power. The thousands of pages of criminal cases of the last 23 years are evidence of the fact that institutional inertia is very much at play and that it cannot run out of its own. It can only be put an end to. Here is a quote from Mikhail Idov, a screenwriter and ex-editor-in-chief of the Russian version of JQ, from an interview he gave to Yuri Dudь, the main Russian interviewer.
Is it a good thing that this sort of knighthood is ruling our government?
Отвечу парадоксально.
My answer will be paradoxical. The main problem with Russia for me is the absence of any institutions or establishments, basically meaning that each organization is defined by its head, and once the head is replaced, the organization changes drastically. While state security is pretty much the only institution that exists in Russia, which is larger than the person in charge of it. In a certain way, that's a good thing.
В некотором роде это круто.
Idov is absolutely right about the institutions, but maybe not so much about the person in charge. Around the same time as this interview, I spoke with a retired Major General of the FSB, Alexander Mikhailov, live on TV Rain. I asked him, what is the difference between FSB today and KGB in the past?
Я все-таки считаю, что сегодня она немножко больше, потому что нет управления.
I think the FSB is a bit larger, because it doesn't have a controlling structure above it. The KGB served the Central Committee of the Communist Party and was its vanguard.
По большому счету, без зеленого...
In other words, without a green light from the committee, almost no operation could have been undertaken by the KGB.
проводил. Что сегодня происходит?
Today, we have a new buyer, so to speak, which is the president of the Russian Federation.
Я хотел бы заметить, что очень часто пытаются...
I would like to note that there are a lot of conversations about the government as a whole, but the reality of it is that the FSB answers to the president only.
Докладывают все материалы только президенту.
Only the president gets all their reports, and as it is a president that came out of their ranks, he cannot be lied to.
Повесишь?
Journalist Andrei Soldatov echoes this statement.
А сейчас такого контроля нет.
There is no such control over it anymore, as was that of the Communist Party and Yeltsin's ideas to change it to something else or break the KGB into multiple agencies which would compete with each other. And so he thought that in this rather medieval manner, the security agencies could be placed under control. This idea was not successful, and we know that Vladimir Putin had a big part in it, because he made the FSB the main and the most powerful security bureau.
In this sense, state security is not an institution at all, but just an extension of the power hierarchy that Putin has been consciously building since his first day in office. In 1991, there were several 100,000 state security employees, with around 80,000 of them in Moscow alone. Several 100,000 people who were trained to do one thing only: find and eliminate dissenters. They all remained at their respective places after the collapse of the USSR. All that remained to be done was to employ them. Chapter in Putin's playbook: seize control of the state security agencies. I want to look at one more important episode. This is the TV program School of Revealment, which was being aired on NTV after its takeover, but while still a relatively respectable TV channel. The idea of the program was to have two hosts invite a guest whom they would proceed to pick apart with both reasonable and unreasonable accusations. The journalist Evgeny Albats was the guest on this episode.
I fought to have democratic institutions be established in our country.
What do you mean? You supported lustration?
Yes, absolutely, and I still support the idea of lustration. I thought that such an institution as the KGB must be closed down, and the recent years have shown that I was right.
So all the other countries will have this kind of institution, but we won't. Is that right?
Not at all. The KGB was not a secret service that conducted investigations and operations for the benefit of society and even the ruling elite. The KGB was the political police. For that very purpose, VCK was founded in 1917 as an establishment of institutionalized repression and violence. It was an instrument of totalitarianism, and that institution should have been destroyed.
Albats continues about how all the KGB people remained in power.
I remember how in 1993 I came to the White House of the Russian parliament, and it was as if the entirety of the Lubyanka KGB headquarters just moved in there.
Well, there were a lot of them around.
Either occupying offices of the government or the president's administration. But today, around 90% of the executive staff of ministries, bureaus, or state businesses are KGB alumni.
Here is one of the hosts' reaction.
Your vigor, I wouldn't say scares me, because it doesn't, since I've known the journalist Albats for many years, but it causes me to have this infantile reflex to oppose it. I'm a famous supporter of democracy and a keeper of the current regime, but when I listen to you, I feel like I'm abroad, or when I listen to what's being said, there I instantly get the desire to become a firm Putinist, just from the sheer anger that I feel when I hear these things.
Trust me, my aim was not to dig up some dirt on this host and accuse her of being a Putinist. It's not this way. Naturally, I understand that she is being ironic, but that irony is very symptomatic. In the early 2000s, irony was the tool used to dismiss all those who were screaming loudly about the criminal regime that was established in Russia and how freedom of speech is already being restricted again. So what was the cause of this ironic approach? Or rather, where did the desire to become a firm Putinist come from? Sometimes this desire would even arise in people who were dissidents and opposers to the Soviet regime. I think this is exactly where the root of it is. In the dissidents' past, the collapse of the USSR in 1991 shocked those dissidents immersively, as they had gotten used to the division between us and them, where we were the victims and they were the perpetrators. In 1991, this image seemed to have left most minds, and it became possible to say, "This is my country, and I chose this president." The fall of barrier between us and the government was epochal. And the symbol of the erasure of this dividing line was the demolition of the Dzerzhinsky statue. There was a sense of having passed the point of no return, that there was physically and objectively no way we could even potentially regress back to Soviet-type despotism. There was a sense that the fight is over and we had won. This sense was developing on many fronts. Dissidents, for example, were certain that they had witnessed this most horrifying evil in such inimitable agony that there was no reason to finish it off, that it would die on its own.
But no one should be put on trial. We can't keep persecuting and putting people on trial as a way of living.
But perhaps there was a stronger and more important sentiment that was common with other people. An incredible aversion to restarting the fight and seeing the barrier come up again. The temptation to join the current government in various ways was insurmountable. For example, you could join it directly, become a political technologist, and feed off the illusion that you are shaping everyone's future.
Was Putin similar to Stiglitz at all in the beginning? Or did he have to be made into a Stiglitz-like figure?
No, he was never like Stiglitz. But the idea was that the presidential candidate had to just materialize out of nowhere, almost out of thin air. The wow factor needed to be great. People had to think to themselves, how did I never notice him before? Hence, our idea was that the candidate should appear as if he was coming out of working undercover.
This last thought really resonates with Putin's little joke about infiltrating the government, doesn't it? But in any case, irony became the popular tool to take down those that can't seem to get off the barricades and kept screaming about the blood on the hands of secret services, because all of it gives one the sense of agency, as if it weren't they, the security agencies or the government, that is, who are controlling our lives, but rather it was us who had them under our collective thumb. This sense cost us much dearly.
When you say that our regime is already fully authoritarian, that freedom of speech is gone, I want to say no freaking way. Of course we have freedom of speech, and you're witnessing it in action right now.
Freedom of speech in action indeed. This episode wasn't allowed to air. Total Recall, I do remember it. There are archives for this case. Thank you for watching my program Total Recall, which is made possible by TV Rain and the Russian Independent Media Archive. All the links to the referenced materials you will find in the description. Be sure to check out our RIMA website if you are interested in Russian independent media and its coverage of Russian and global affairs throughout the last 20 years. Stay with TV Rain.